Do you hear him? He called us old people. And that's okay because we are. We are not in denial. We embrace it, do we not? Why? Here's the question of chapter 11. We come to the second to the last chapter of our study. Lord willing, we'll do chapter 11 today, and we'll finish it up next week with chapter 12. And then we'll do a short interlude with the Beatitudes. And then we're going to look forward to what Pastor Tim has for us for the summer. And I'll be coming from time to time when I'm in town. I'd love to come on over and see what's going on, just to participate. Well, chapter 11 Ecclesiastes is about this issue of generosity. It's just one of those questions that come up. Why is generosity so difficult? And we know it's difficult because not too many people are. And the reason people aren't is because we view that we have a quality of life. And if I keep giving parts of my quality of life away, am I not giving partially my precious life to others? And what's in it for me? But what does Paul say? Matter of fact, Paul in 1 Corinthians, he's writing towards the end of his life here, and he writes this to a young pastor. And he says in chapter 6 of 1 Timothy, verse 17, instruct those who are rich in this present world, life under the sun. There's some resources. In this context is that usually the poor are those who didn't know where their next meal was coming. If you knew where your next meal was coming, if you know you have a house to go back to, and you have some discretionary funds, you don't have to consume everything on just surviving, that puts you in a category in this context as rich. So he says, now instruct those who are rich that they're dirty dogs and are going to hell. No, I didn't read that right. No, that's not quite what it says. But there is this bias against people. Well, if you're wealthy or you have a lot of resources, you're probably not as spiritual as I am because I'm as poor as a dead rat, But here what he says is instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited. Don't think it makes you better than someone else, or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches. It's amazing how fast that stuff can go away. But on God, now watch this, who richly supplies us with all things, and here's the kicker, to enjoy. God's not up there like a cosmic killjoy and just saying, be miserable. That's my goal for your life, and I'll bless you if you're miserable. No, he says he's given us, especially those who have resources, he's given us these resources so we can have some fun with those resources, to enjoy, instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous. The word generous, the word geno, it means from nobility. Because back in these days, only nobility had any discretionary funds to be able to share with anybody. Made you noble. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Storing up. Now, what's in it for you? It says, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. This life under the sun, this mortal life from our birth to our physical death. He's simply saying, you want to enjoy it? God wants you to enjoy it. And part of the way of enjoying it is generosity. But it so counters what everybody and what we feel. We're actually fearful about giving, and that's why we get angry when someone brings it up. By the way, relax, we'll not be taking an offering today, so don't worry about it. Because we get this idea that people want us to give money away like a drunken sailor. And what a waste. Because there's no return. I mean, if I give money and there's some return, that's called an investment. Now we're talking. I'm a good businessman, so if you're asking me to make an investment where I get some return for it, well, then I'm in. But giving, being generous, seems like you're giving money away and there's no guarantee of any return. So it really comes down to the question, am I not actually giving away my happiness? My government guarantees that I can pursue the path of happiness. And happiness seems to be a big deal. Which brings up this question, is there more to life, here it comes, than being happy? Studies have found that those who have their primary focus on happiness, tend to be known as takers. They take because they want basically to be happy. To be happy, you've got to take. But those whose primary focus is a sense of meaning, purpose, significance, they're known as the givers. In September 1942, Viktor Frankl, a prominent Jewish psychiatrist and neurologist in Vienna, he was arrested along with his family and his parents, and they were transported to the Nazi concentration camps. 3 years later, when the camp was liberated, most of his family had perished, including his pregnant wife. Prisoner number 119104 actually survived. That was Victor. And he later on wrote one of the iconic bestsellers, and he only wrote it in 9 days. 9 days. And it was about his experiences in the concentration camps. And the title, of course, was called Man's Search for Meaning. If you went to college, you were forced to read it. Man's Search for Meaning. And he came up, and his observation was, why is it that some of his people died and some of his people survived? And his conclusion, by the way, this isn't a believer. His conclusion was it boiled down to one thing: meaning. Those who are just all about being happy, well, what do you do when all your happiness is stripped away? You lose hope and you die. But those who were not so focused on being happy, but having meaning, purpose, and so instead of being takers when there's nothing to take, they were always givers. And they could still give. And he says those are the ones who survived. This was an insight he had previously, because as a high school student, one of his science teachers had declared to the class, quote, "Life is nothing more than a combustion process, a process of oxidation." To which apparently young Victor jumped up and said, "Sir, if this is true, then what can be the meaning of life?" Now, a new study more recently published in the Journal of Positive Psychology, scientists are confirming the fact that a happy life is associated with takers, while leading a meaningful life corresponds with givers. Happiness without meaning characterizes a relatively shallow, self-absorbed life. End of quote. So how do a happy life and a meaningful life, how do they differ? Well, a happy life creates feelings, good feelings. It's all about feeling good. But for people where they are givers, it's not all about feeling good. It's about feeling joy. You remember what joy is? The Greek word kara means the absence of fear. There's a sense of fulfillment, purpose, meaning, joy, definition that comes only if one is a giver, not if one is a taker. Meaning apparently transcends the self, while happiness is all about giving the self what it wants. Frankl's conclusion, quote, "Being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself." You don't read a bunch about this stuff here. And right now you're kind of cross-eyed. I can tell. I'm looking at you. See, basically, happiness flutters with the moments of pleasure, but meaning endures with the soul. It was C.S. Lewis who said, quote, "For many of us, the obstacle of charity lies not in our luxurious living or even our desire for more money, but in our fear of insecurity." Most people, they live by the motto, get all you can all you get, then sit on the can. And kind of figure, now I'm secure and happy, and yet they're miserable because there's no meaning to their life. So what is the wisdom when it comes to generosity? Well, if you haven't already, open to chapter 11 of Solomon's really honest wisdom warning about this issue of being a taker and a giver. The idea of, my whole goal of life is being happy, good feelings? Or is it to have a sense of purpose, significance, meaning, and does have a deep, deep joy that endures? So he picks it up, really, and he picks it up right here in verse 1. He says, "Cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days." You've heard this phrase, cast your bread upon the waters. Sounds kind of dumb, doesn't it? In the East, bread was made in thin little cakes, and they would float. If you threw them in a river, they would float for a little while. But who wants to be accused of flinging bread into the water? Possibly what he's talking about is a saying they had in Egypt. They found in Egypt, although he's not in Egypt, but at that time, they found the best time to plant was when the Nile was subsiding. So as the Nile was subsiding, it would look like you're throwing your seed in the water. But in reality, that water would drain away and become dampened earth, and you'd have a phenomenal harvest. Maybe he's talking about that. But there's an Aramaic proverb of the 2nd century BC by a Jewish scribe named Ben Sira, and he said, quote, "Scatter thy bread on the water and on the dry land. In the end of the days thou findest it again." And he probably got it from Solomon in this statement here in chapter 11. There's also an Arabic proverb, "Do good, cast thy bread into the water, thou shalt be repaid someday." See, why are you going to these Aramaic and ancient proverbs? Well, we're trying to figure out what does Solomon mean by what he says. Some say he's simply talking about foreign investments. That basically you got to get over this thing that when I give money, I want repay, I want benefit, I want profit right now. And usually the example that back in those days, if you're going to invest, you would put your cargo on a ship and the ship goes out and it may be months before you see any profit. And this idea of I'm only going to invest if I have an immediate profit, he says that's not the real world. The proverbial saying in commerce is where ships would return with a gain, but only after infinite periods of time. So we must venture forth, sometimes in giving, without thought of immediate personal gain. That's his point. He's talking from a commercial perspective. But he's going to build on this because it may appear that, but if I throw my money away, it feels like I am throwing it away. Where it might end up being the wisest investment I've ever made if I'm willing to wait for those ships and the cargo to come back with the profit. God says, I'm going to give you a chance for a promise. What he's probably really saying is this. First, get out of your mind that, hey, happiness is when I give and immediately I take. But maybe this idea of meaning and wisdom has to do with the fact that I give without thinking about in terms of what do I get in return? What profit do I receive right now? Because that's my nature. But rather, he gives us a chance to trust a promise. Solomon also wrote Proverbs 19, verse 17, and here's the promise. Proverbs 19, verse 17 says, "He who is gracious to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deeds." That's what all the Proverbs were all talking about. The only thing is that means that you're going to have to believe there really is a God, and God is engaged, and God keeps his promises. It's the same thing that Paul argues at the end of Romans chapter 12. I mean, vengeance is sweet. Someone birds me, I'm coming after you, right? Because it feels good for me to bring my own vengeance. And what does Paul say in Romans 12? God says, "Vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. I will repay you as much as possible. Be at peace with all men." Well, if you burn me, and I'm not going to come after you with revenge, but I'm going to believe a promise that God says if there needs to be judgment, needs to be justice, needs to be revenge, God says, I will take care of that. That's not what I've called you to do. Boy, the only way I'm going to do that and trust that promise is if I believe there really is a God. And I really believe God engages and that God keeps his promises. Anytime you take your own revenge, that's what's just simply saying, I don't believe, I don't trust God's there. I don't trust he's engaged. I don't trust he's going to keep his promise. Well, it's the same thing you have right here. If I am generous and I give to a need of the poor, of people around me, the promise is I'm lending to the Lord. The Lord takes responsibility for that person receiving my generosity. And God's promises says, I'll repay you. Don't worry about your payback. And it may not be the time or the way you think, but it might be the wisest investment you've ever made. Look at verse 2. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. This phrase, this phrase when he talks about the fact that give, it's a Hebrew concept of basically controlling, giving to others. And notice when he says divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, that's a way of saying being generous to others, even beyond what you normally would do. Because you don't know when misfortunes may come to you. And you may need to have some people that will be willing to be there for you. This is what Jesus said in Luke 16:9. Jesus could be very practical. I love that parable where Jesus, in Luke 19, Jesus gives denarius to some of his workers. Not Jesus, but in the parable, the master. And then the master tells him to go out and do business. That's Jesus. Jesus is saying, go out and do business. And they're rewarded based on their profit. Well, in the same way, Jesus said this in Luke 16:9, make yourself friends by means of mammon, of righteousness. There's something about putting other people in moral debt to yourself. It's very shrewd as a serpent, gentle as a dove. That if you've been generous to others, it's likely that when you're hurting, they'll be generous to you. And so therefore, it is a sense, this generosity becomes an investment of having people who may come and be there for you. But what happens when they don't show up? Well, again, what is the risk? The risk is the promise of God. He who is gracious to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deed. So what's holding us back if that's the promise? Verse 3. If the clouds are full, now what is it going to give us here? Excuses that we all use for not being generous. Because I don't want to just give my money away because it's giving my happiness away, and that's my goal of life. He says, if the clouds are full, they pour out rain upon the earth, and whether a tree falls toward the south or towards the north, wherever the tree falls, and there it lies. Now there's one of those verses to memorize and tattoo somewhere. What in the world is he talking about? He's talking about the excuses that we give. Well, I shouldn't plant because the clouds are full of rain and may wash out my whole crop. Or if I go out there in the forest and cut wood, a tree may fall on me. I mean, it's these things that I have apprehension. I can't anticipate everything. I always can't control. So we come up with these excuses. And the excuse is I have no control. It looks like, it's not a good time for me to plant my seed. That's a little maybe too much of a risk to go out in the forest. A tree may fall upon me. And so it paralyzes our motivation to be generous. It sounds like I'm just not sure I'm in a place to be generous. Things can always reverse for me, but I better play it safe. I was president of Phoenix Seminary for 23 years. Guess what I did not enjoy for 23 years? I can't think of one day I enjoyed being president of Phoenix Seminary. Something wasn't that great to call you president? No, it's fundraising. And I had all kinds of friends as a pastor that trusted me, that loved me, that I knew. But then when I became president of seminary, I'm walking up to you and you're giving me that look. Hey, let's have lunch. Why? When are you going to hit me up? Am I now a checkbook to you? And I hated that idea that people would think I want something from them. But their response almost, I don't know how many times the response was, I would love to give to the seminary. Because I say, well, do you want a seminary or not? And I love to give seminary, but now's not really a good time. Things are kind of tight. I got this going on, this going on. Everybody had a great excuse for not giving, although faithful ones did give. And this day, Phoenix Seminary is absolutely debt-free. Multiple of millions of dollars have been given over the last 30 years plus. There are those who think I'm a remarkable fundraiser, but I don't ask people for money. I guess they just feel sorry for me. I don't know what it is. But God's been good. But always these excuses not to be generous. It's never a good time to be generous. Verse 4. He who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the clouds will not reap. I insist on certainties, favorable conditions. Matter of fact, maybe if I get a windfall, I'll tip you, and I'll be generous. when it's only a good time for me. And so a farmer hesitates over threatening wind and clouds, so he never gets around to planting or reaping. It's impossible to man. There's absolutely no absolutes that it's ever going to be a good time to be generous. So if your excuse is, I'm waiting, there's certain times I can be generous and other times I can't. No. Either you're a taker and you're all about your own happiness, or you're a giver and you're about this significance and finding meaning and purpose by being generous. But there's a risk. Yeah, there's always a risk. You know, in business they say, higher the risk, higher the profit. Lower the risk, lower the profit. And that's probably true. But where's the real risk here? We're risking one thing. Will God keep his promise? We're basically declaring, I believe there's a God. I believe God's engaged in my life and that God keeps his promises. So the risk, but if I do be generous and I give money to people who are hurting or needs I'm made aware of, how do I know I'm being a good steward? How do I know I'm not just throwing God's money away? Because, okay, I'll admit that everything I have was given to me by God, but I don't want to be blowing his money. Well, then how do you know that generosity is wise generosity and not wasting God's money? Well, the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians, I love this section because Paul, remember, he came from Jerusalem and now he's planting churches, Gentile churches in Galatia and Corinth and all around. And while he's been gone, in Jerusalem, there's a horrible famine. And everybody's hurting in Jerusalem, especially the Christian Jewish believers, because they've been ex-synagogued. And so they're really hurting. Guess what Paul's doing among the Gentile churches? He's doing fundraising. He's taking up an offering. And I love the way he does it. For example, in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9, it's all about this issue of generosity. And he's shrewd. In chapter 8, before he goes down to Corinth, he writes his letter to Corinth. He says, you know, I'm up here in the north, and the churches are being so generous. They're being so wonderful that they're giving towards this offering beyond their own means. Now, I'm coming down to you, and I hope you're as generous as they are. Boy, I would have hired Paul to raise money for the seminary. But then he kind of gives, in this letter, in chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians, he says this. He says, let each one do just as he has purposed in his heart. Now, the verse just before that is this reaping, sowing thing. Now, this I say, he who sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully shall also reap bountifully. Picture's easy. You want a big crop, you don't throw a little seed. Throw a lot of seed, big crop, little seed, little crop. Then he goes right on to explain what he's talking about. Let each one do just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, because God loves a cheerful giver. God is able to make all grace abound to you, that always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance. Christians usually on radio GIVE or television 21, stop right there. You go ahead and give to my ministry. Send me a check. You'll throw a seed and you'll get rich. I promise you. You give to me and God's going to bless you and you're going to be wealthy. And then they quote this verse. Doesn't it say, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance? The only problem is they didn't finish the verse. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 more words. You may have an abundance for every good deed. What's that? He says he scattered abroad, he gave to the poor, his righteousness abides forever. Now, he, God, who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food. So when God provides for you, you work hard, you studied hard, whatever, but face it, you can get cancer, you can get sick, you can be fired. It's still God who makes it possible for you to gain resources at work or whatever it might be. Now, some of those resources, he says, is bread. Guess what the bread's for? You. It's your blessing from God. It's the provision for your family. Send your kids to college. Go ahead and have insurance and protection for your wife on your own life. Be wise steward of the bread that God gives you. But not everything he provides for us is bread. Some of us are chewing on the seed. Listen to what he says. Now, he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. He doesn't promise, I'm going to make it so you can get a bigger house, a bigger car, and eat more and go more vacations. No. You learn to be content with what God's given you for bread. But not all that you've been given by God is for bread. He says he will actually increase what? The bread or the seed? Come on, say it. It's the seed. And the purpose of the seed is sowing. And the sowing the seed, giving, being generous, is a work of righteousness, he says in verse 11. You will be enriched in everything for all liberality, which through us is producing thanksgivings to God. He's not talking about throwing money away, wasting money by giving money to everybody and anything that asks for it. Notice what happens. Those who are sowing seed, by giving and being generous, they are producing what? That's why he calls it a ministry. Thanksgivings to God. Watch this, verse 12. For the ministry of this service is not only fully supplying the needs of the saints. That's great. Needs are met. But is also overflowing through many thanksgivings to God. Because of the proof given by this ministry, they all glorify God for your obedience to your confession of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for the generosity of your contribution to them and to all. In other words, generosity produces worship, produces thanksgiving and gratitude upon those who have their needs met. So, do I give to the Red Cross? No. But I will give the Samaritan Purse because there I know that people will be told and people will realize they're being loved by God and that that will produce thanksgiving. So you're never wasting. How many times have I seen? I remember one time Holly and I were at a restaurant. And our sound man at Scottsdale Bible Church, he was there with his family, 2 little kids, 4 of them, at a whole house. And they were eating and having a good time. This is Sunday after church. And Holly and I were there, and I was just kind of watching him because I happen to also know how much he makes. And I remember just thinking, Holly, I think we ought to just pick up their tab and tip, take care of it. So we did. Called a waitress over. I said, we like to just provide theirs, and I'll leave a good tip. But now, if we were really godly, we would walk away, right? Oh, no. I sat there. I wanted to see how he was going to respond. So I see the waitress walk over to his table, and all of a sudden they're talking, and he thinks he's bringing the bill, and I can't hear it, but she basically tells him that someone has, don't say who, but someone has picked up your tab. And you know what they immediately did? All 4 of them bowed their heads. That $25, $30, $40, whatever it was, I've never enjoyed $20, $30, $40 more than that moment. I had the privilege to actually produce praise and worship in the middle of Aho Al's by that family. This is what he's talking about. That's not throwing away money. This isn't wasting money. This is a ministry that God's called us, and he gives us seed. And if we're faithful, he'll increase the seed that we could do it more often. And whether that's given to your church, because do you believe your church is directly or indirectly producing thanksgiving to God? Missionaries, pastors, whatever it might be, or it just might be. Holly and I used to have what we call an agape fund. We just had a savings account, and we let it build up. And we would see somebody hurting, we would go ahead and send them Sedona for a weekend just to get away from the kids. I'm not bragging. I'm just simply saying we had the privilege of seeing God produce thanksgiving and worship to God in so many different ways. And that's called meaning. That's called significance. That's called joy. It's not about happiness. Well, then he goes on and he picks it up and he says, verse 5. Just as you do not know the path of the wind or how bones are formed in the womb of a pregnant woman, there's some things you don't wait to understand. Well, I'm not going to have a baby till I know how those bones are formed. You're never going to have a baby. So you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. If you wait, here's no excuse. If you wait till, well, I got to understand. I remember one guy gave a gift to the seminary. That was great, but I was never going to ask him again or approach him about it. He made me fill out a 10-page report on the seminary because he wanted to know exactly where every cent went and what was going on. And thank you for the $5,000, but I don't have time nor need to do that. Because you can't control it all. He says, there's no way you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. When we are generous, there's no strings attached. That's paying somebody to do something. I will trust God. You give thanks to God. This is from God. I remember Steve Andrews when his father passed away years and years ago. His father left all of Steve's friends $100. So I got $100 with the explanation that you have 1 year to give this away to somebody. So I folded it up, put it in my wallet, thought about it for about 8 months. I was over at Fashion Square, and I was there, and I was buying something, and I saw this folded up $100 bill, and I went, oh, no. I got to get rid of this. Now, that's not really generosity, but I got to get rid of this. I made a covenant that I would do it. And so first I saw the dear Hispanic lady sweeping. I could tell she was not, riding high. I just drove by, rolled down the window. I said, God loves you and God wants you to have this. And then I gave it to her and I ran away. Half a minute, I looked in the rearview mirror just to see her response. It's really something to see a broom drop to the ground and 2 arms lifted to God in praise. This is that whole world of meaning, purpose, significance. Remember Psalm 139? Days ordained for us when we were yet in our mother's womb. Each day, it's not just the number of days you have left to live. Each day that you have left to live is ordained. There's some adventure, something special, significant that's supposed to happen that day. Like I said, it may be just kindness to a child. It might be being an action of generosity, paying for somebody's lunch. It might be just encouragement in some way. But he says, verse 6, sow your seed in the morning and not be idle in the evening. For you do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed or whether both of them alike will be good. So you don't know. I like the King James translates this. It says, do not withhold thy hand. If it's in the morning, the afternoon, be generous. You don't know how God's going to use that. Psalmist says, number your days so that you may present to God a heart of wisdom. Every day is ordained, and every day you have an opportunity to do something that's greatly significant to God. So let your life count. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, that's where Paul simply says, we live in these lives. We build upon the foundation of Jesus Christ. And it says, and our works, our expression of our faith will be judged by fire. Interesting. So that which is wood, hay, stubble is going to burn right up. But that which is gold and silver and precious stones will remain. Then he says this, oh my, you shall receive a reward. I've talked to certain really spiritual Christians who say, I don't need a reward from God. I'm too spiritual for that. I'm going for the reward that comes from my Heavenly Father because he's been honored by me in my life. See, our life is a resume. What's the difference between wood, hay, stubble, and gold, silver, precious stones? This was those things that I did that produced happiness in my life. And I was a taker. But the gold, silver, and precious stones, that's what I gave. That's generosity. That was the purpose, and that was the ministry and reward. What is the reward? If I study this, I don't have time to go into it other than the fact we're going to reign with Christ in a new heaven, new earth. If we're going to reign with Christ, we better learn how to reign. Well, Christ is going to reign. What's the reign of Christ all about? What's the Lord's Prayer? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on as it is already every place else. In other words, when Jesus reigns, the whole goal is to bring and implement the will of the Heavenly Father into creation. Well, then I better learn how to do that if I'm going to reign with Christ. And as well as I learn to do that is probably what I'll be reporting on in my resume when I stand before the bema seat of Christ. Can he trust me to be generous so that the will of God is actually accomplished in people's lives. People get to experience his love even through my generosity. Or is it the fact that I'm just happy Darryl, happy feet, that basically you can't trust me. And do I go to heaven? That's not the issue. But what will I be doing in the new heavens, new earth? It all comes down to this based on 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Well, quickly, now what he says is that, next verse. He goes on and he says, the light is pleasant, verse 7, and it is good for the eyes to see the sun. That's just a Hebrew way of saying celebrating life. You wake up, feel the sun, you feel blessed. Indeed, if a man should live many years, in this context, that usually meant you're living under the blessing of God. If a man lives for many years, let him rejoice in them all. And let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. Everything that is to come will be Havel, will pass quickly. Now, what's he talking about here? What he's talking about is basically the years that are to come. What are these years that are to come? He says you got to learn to enjoy. He uses the word bekulam, which means enjoy each and every day that's been ordained for you. This is why generosity is one way, the way, to enjoy each and every day. He says, let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. Now some say days of darkness talks about aging. Matter of fact, he'll really get into that next week. When he talks about, when you have hard times and dark clouds come. For those who are young, well, that's okay. They'll be followed by sunshine and light. But for the aged one, he says, the dark clouds are simply followed by what? More dark clouds. I am not getting better. I am not getting younger. I am doing better today than I'll be doing a year from now. And I know that. And if I know that my days are going to get weaker, I'm not getting stronger, I'm not getting brighter, dark clouds will follow. Meanwhile, what does that mean? Feel horrible? No, it doesn't mean that. What it means is get motivated. If I'm putting together a resume, I don't want the last part of it empty. And so, therefore, let him remember the days of darkness, for they're going to be many. Get ready. And even, how do you enjoy a day, those days when they're not good days? Well, those are the days that we learn to hope. See, we got an interesting thing. We are mortals and we are immortals. We're mortals in our life under the sun, from our physical birth to physical death. And as mortals, we live in a world that doesn't always make sense. But we can be generous and honor the Heavenly Father as a ministry, as part of our life. But here's the whole point. We're also immortal. This soul in me. People ask me, will we be able to recognize each other when we get to heaven, new earth? Well, let me just ask you this. Take a look. Now, picture this. An absolutely perfect body conformed to the resurrected body of Jesus Christ. Do you think it might take you a while to recognize me? Absolutely. I have a picture of my mom and dad when they were first married, because that makes me realize that's probably what they look like today in heaven. So it is here. He's talking about the fact that we enjoy each day. And notice he says, everything that will come will be passed quickly. So if life's going to go so quickly, as a mortal, it's going to end. Like I told you before, they can't make us stay under the sun. Now that's kind of a reverse of normal. You think, well, I don't want to die. Sure you do if you're not afraid of heaven, although it's God's business, the days ordained for me. But at the same time, are you really afraid of heaven? I'm not excited about the dying part. Jesus was not thrilled with the cross, but the glory afterwards. So I hope it's a little heart attack. Oh, gone. I don't want to be drooling, or messing myself up. But the fact is, eventually the pain stops and we're immortal. And we're going to be immortal, living in new heavens, new earth, reigning with Christ. Now he says here, rejoice, young man. Now we got one or two. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant. during the days of your young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all of these things. So remove vexation from your heart, put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are havel. They're fleeting. You're going to grow older, like it or not. And what he does here as he closes is, how do I put myself in a place to enjoy the days I have by being generous? And what he does here, interesting, he gives us a key. A key to this kind of life, very practical, very quick, and it has basically 4 teeth in the key. First tooth, verse 9, he says, let your heart be pleasant. Make your heart good. See, wait a second. So I'm supposed to follow my heart desires? But Moses said in Numbers 15, verse 39 and 40, your heart is deceptive. Your heart is basically your problem. Yeah, that's before God pulled the heart of stone out of you and placed the Spirit within you, gave you a new heart, and now you get these thoughts, these deep desires to do things you never did before as a believer. That's what he's talking about. Make your heart good. When all of a sudden you get this thought, this deep desire. Remember, not all thoughts are your own. Again, I've told you, where did Judas get the idea to betray Jesus? That was really dumb. But John 13, verse 2, John tells us, and Satan put it into the heart of Judas to betray Christ. And then he carried it out. That's when Satan took control of him. Not all thoughts are your own. That's why Paul says, take every thought captive. Some thoughts are from me. I can identify because they usually benefit me. Some thoughts are really scary. I really want to hurt somebody or something, whatever it might be, and I know, whoa. That's the thought I do not want to embrace. Remember Ephesians 6:12, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but harassing forces of darkness. That's all really satanic energy can do, is give you weird thoughts, get you to doubt yourself. No, don't embrace all your thoughts. But when you get those thoughts from time to time that really do not necessarily benefit you, they're selfless because you see a need and you say, I could say something. I could go sit next to that person. I could go maybe pay for their lunch. I could maybe cover their gas bill this month. When you get those thoughts, make your heart good, because guess who implanted the heart's desire? Psalm 37, verse 4. When he says, I used to think it was the Christmas verse, delight yourself in the Lord. He'll give you the desires of your heart. What a great verse. Be really, really good and you get everything you want for Christmas. But that's not what the verse says. The Hebrew literally is, take pleasure in honoring God and he'll implant his desires in your heart. So all of a sudden you'll get out of nowhere this generous thought to do something nice for someone else. He says, make your heart good. Just do it. Was that Nike? Just do it. Then the second thing he gives here, the second tooth of this key, is know that God brings judgment. He says, because God will judge all these things. You say, well, that's a downer. He's always looking over me. You're going to bring judgment? It's interesting. And when the Egyptians had a party, they'd have one of the servants walk around with a little toy corpse. And this Egyptian, as he would be walking around with this toy corpse, he would basically be saying that, look upon this, for as you enjoy tonight, there will be a day that you will be this. Now you kind of think, wouldn't that be a fun job? Just kind of be a damper on everybody. But in that context, had an opposite effect. I mean, people realize we better have a good time tonight because we don't know about what's going to happen, because we know we're going to die. The point, they did studies and they found that children coming from homes where rules and consequences for breaking those rules were clearly set and carried out, these children grew up more confident and not fearing their environment. Because the kids that just had it wide open, they didn't know what they could not do that would not destroy themselves. And so as they grew, they realized in their own wisdom, there's things I can do that can destroy myself. But when they had parents define what those things were, and there were parameters, and there were rules, they found those children tend to not be afraid of life. Because they know the rules, they know the consequences, and therefore they are more meaningful people. Thirdly, that third tooth, he says, remove vexation. Now, what is that? Verse 10. So remove vexation from your heart. The word vexation is resentment. I will ask Christians, do you struggle at all with bitterness? Oh, no, I'm a Christian. All right, do you struggle with resentment? No, I go to church. Okay, let me just ask you this. Have you ever been disappointed? Well, yeah, everybody gets disappointed. Well, if you keep being disappointed and you start thinking you are going to be disappointed, that's called resentment. When you make up your mind that everybody is going to disappoint me, that's bitterness. And Hebrews chapter 12 says, do not let a root of bitterness rise up within you. That word root, ridza is the Hebrew word, the Greek word, and it speaks of a tapeworm. Boy, they go down easy, they're hard getting them out. That's what bitterness is. And bitterness basically is created by one thing: disappointment and expectations. In other words, if you want to set yourself up to be a bitter person, have a lot of high expectations on everybody and everything. And you're going to have everybody and everything disappointing you till you're bitter towards all of it. I have sliding expectations. I meet you first time, high expectations. You look normal, look wonderful, look like a good person. And then if you're not, I let my expectations just go down. Because I don't want to continue a relationship with you and continually be disappointed. I'd rather lower my expectations. There's people I have high expectations, and there's some people I don't have hardly any expectations. That's how I can be a pastor for 57 years and not hate people. Notice? I'm okay still. And so this remove vexation is take a look at the reality of your expectations on people and the world around you. And those expectations, you know, are just going to feed more and more disappointment, thus resentment, thus bitterness. Remove it. You don't have to have high expectations and everything. And when somebody or something proves to be consistently disappointing, drop your expectation. Don't be expecting so much so you don't always have to be going through that vexation. Then the last thing he puts here is put away pain from your body. You know, that's why we just wish you younger ones, we could just grow you up real fast. Because neurologists tell us that the frontal lobe of the brain, which makes connections between actions and consequences, it is the last part that the glial cells of the brain mature. So this is brain development. And you want to know when those frontal cortex cells are fully matured? Not till you're 25. So those of you under 25, you make me nervous. Because you're dealing with, okay, I'm not accusing, but you look young, all right? But the fact being, those under 25, no wonder. The answer is that's what frat parties are all about. Now, the thing is, what he's saying here is those things that you know that will hurt your body. You're going to live in this carcass for a long time. So why do you want to put drugs in it, alcohol in it, vaping, smoking, grass? This isn't about, I don't smoke, I don't chew, and I don't go to the girls who do. That's not what this is about. This is about 1 Corinthians 6, verse 12, that says, you can do any of this as far as you're not going to lose your salvation, but not all things are profitable. And that's why he says in verses 19 and 20 of 1 Corinthians 6, don't you know your body, you're not your own, you've been redeemed by a price? Therefore, glorify God with your body. That is, let the healthiest thing for your body is manifest what your Heavenly Father's like. And as you're manifesting His personality, His character, you're going to find it's the healthiest thing for your body because that's what your body was created to do. So as I'm sitting there lighting up and vaping, am I saying, God, I'm doing this to honor you? Or I'm going ahead and having 4 or 5 drinks and getting plastered and then acting like a fool. God, I'm doing this to honor you. Sometimes we just need to ask ourselves the question. And that goes with overeating. That goes with, he simply says, put away pain from your body. Put away anything that is going to harm this. 1 Corinthians 3, don't you know your body is the temple of God, temple of the Holy Spirit. And since you're going to live in it, I meet some of my friends, guys who played in high school football. And boy, they got all the chicks. Well, I'll tell you, we nerds got nothing. But they got all the chicks. Now, what do we have at 75? And what do they have? The chicks are gone and they're walking like Neanderthals. The fact is, put pain out of your body. Now, when he closes this out, he simply says this. Remember, what is generosity? What makes it easy? What makes it hard? What makes it hard is that if the focus of my life is happiness, feeling pleasures, then basically you're a taker. You're a taker, and your life is shallow. There's not much meaning or purpose to it. On the other hand, if you are all about, I want to be generous, I want to be noble, I want to have meaning and purpose, significance in my life, then you're going to be a giver. And if you're a giver, generosity is so easy and makes so much sense. And this is the wisdom of Solomon. God bless you. See you next week when we talk about how horrible it is to age.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to our Redeemer YouTube channel. If this is helpful for you, please make sure that you like this video, smash the subscribe button, and hit that bell icon. It will help us reach more people with biblical truth. Thank you so much.